Hello, welcome to Treasures of Knowledge with Kimberley. This is a YouTube channel on the discussion of scriptures. This series is on the Old Testament, and today's episode is part 2 of a 3-part series on the timeline of the Old Testament. The first episode was on Adam to Joseph of Egypt. Today's episode will be on Moses through David, and the third will be on King Solomon through Malachi. So we ended the first segment talking about Joseph of Egypt's family being brought into Egypt and the Pharaoh giving them the land of Goshen. And there are 70 members that were brought into the land. God shares with him that his family will be in Egypt for 400 years in Genesis 15. And the scriptures go on to say that at this point, many years pass by and there is a new king of Egypt that doesn't remember Joseph and his people. And he becomes very concerned over the growing population and power of the Hebrews. He begins to enslave them, and they are enslaved for many, many generations. Then the Pharaoh of the land becomes concerned still over the growth of the children of Israel and decrees to the midwives that when they are birthing the Hebrew women's children, that they should destroy them. The midwives have respect for the God of Israel and don't wish to do this, and they vacillate on this decree. It is during this time that Moses' parents, Jochebed and Amram, have Moses, and they are able to hide him for 3 months. But no longer to do so, they put him in a basket and send him off down the waters to where the daughter of Pharaoh finds him in the bulrushes. She rescues the baby and brings him into her home. There she asks a maid to find a nurse for the child, and the maid takes the baby to Jochebed, who nurses him, and once he is done nursing, is brought back to the daughter of Pharaoh, who raises him. Now we don't know how long it is before Moses is told of his heritage. He is concerned over the treatment of his people, and this is where we see him killing a guard as he is beating one of the slaves. Moses then flees Egypt and goes into the wilderness. We learn that he enters the land of Midian and finds Zipporah at the well being harassed by a bunch of men, and Moses saves her. Well, he then later marries her. Just a fun side note, Moses is depicted to be in his early 20s at this point in time by modern day movies, but Exodus 7 and Acts 7 tells us that Moses is about 40 years old at this time. He lives in the wilderness for another 40 years before this experience of God communicating to him through the burning bush, and is instructed that he needed to return to Israel to save his people. Well, Moses is reluctant to do this, I'm sure for many reasons, but one of which is that he is slow in speech. He is then given Aaron, his brother, to be a spokesman. Moses and Aaron enter Pharaoh's court and demand God's decree to let his people go. He then shows a series of miracles or plagues to encourage the Pharaoh to let them leave Egypt. The first of which is his rod being changed to a serpent, and then the water being turned to blood. Then I'll read to you the series of plagues that follow. He said the plagues are the frogs, the lice, flies, boils, and blains, hail and fire, the plague of the locusts, the thick darkness, and then ultimately the destroying of the firstborn of all of the Egyptians. God tells Moses to instruct the children of Israel to sacrifice a lamb and put the blood on their doorposts, and so that the destroying angel that comes through at night will pass the children of Israel by. And so they do this, and they perform a ritual of eating breads and herbs, which is celebrated every year since, and today is known as the Seder. With this final plague, the Pharaoh allows the children of Israel to exit Egypt. Of course, we know the well-known story of Moses parting the Red Sea and them crossing on dry ground. Interestingly enough, though, little known is the other three events where waters were parted. One is by Joshua, the other is Elijah, and Elisha. You can check those stories in the Old Testament for some fun reading. Once the children of Israel are in the wilderness, Moses goes to the mount and talks with God, and this is where he receives the 10 Commandments. He is there on the mount for so long, though, that the children of Israel think he's not coming back. So they command Aaron to build a golden calf to worship. Well, this doesn't go so well, and the children of Israel are then not allowed to enter into the promised land until all of those who have crossed over from Egypt have passed away. So Moses, though, is given another decree, and that is for them to build the tabernacle. And then the Levites are called to officiate in all of the ordinances. They receive the blessing of manna being provided for them miraculously every morning, and so they have something to eat. And they eat on this for 40 years. Well, Moses is not allowed to go into the promised land, but Joshua then succeeds him. He parts the river Jordan, and they cross over on dry ground, and they come to the land of Jericho, where they miraculously conquer the city. Joshua rules the children of Israel for a period of time, and at his death then starts a series of 12 judges that rule the children of Israel. After this point, though, the children of Israel want a king like all of their neighbors. God is reluctant but relinquishes on this, and then we come to the book of Samuel, where Hannah is barren and pleads for the blessing of a child. God blesses her, and she promises that she will give him to God to serve in the temple. So once her child is born, she names him Samuel. He goes to the temple and is raised by Eli, who has some sons that aren't righteous, and they officiate in the temple. Samuel later then calls Saul to be the first king of the Jews. Saul reigns for a period of time and is not very righteous, and then David is his successor. David comes around about 300 years after the Exodus, and the children of Israel have not conquered all of the land. That's David's conquest, and he does. He vanquishes their enemies and unites all of the tribes and sets up one religion and brings the tabernacle to Shiloh. He wants to build the temple but is not allowed to, but he collects artifacts for his son Solomon to do so. Unfortunately, the last 20 years of King David's life is marred by his experience with Bathsheba. But it is this relationship that King Solomon comes from. And Solomon is his successor to the throne, and ultimately where Christ's lineage comes from. Now, David continues to make some poor decisions. David is contrite, does repent of this altercation, and the beautiful message in this is that we can repent from our transgressions and make things right. And that's the end of this episode. Please join me for the third part in this series titled Solomon through Malachi.